Matthew Lesh. Matthew, thank you very much for joining us on the show. I'll start by just asking you the basic question. Is it a good idea?
Look, I think Labour's nationalisation plans risk being a complete and total disaster. It's worth remembering that the trains have been nationalised before. They were nationalised post-war, and we saw a huge dive in passenger numbers, in the quality of services. Now, they were privatised post-1995, and since then there's been a doubling in passenger numbers to 2019, so over 1.5 billion passenger journeys. Now, you can contrast this actually quite interestingly with the Tube. The Tube remained in public ownership, and the passenger numbers didn't grow anywhere near as quickly compared to commuter rail or compared to long-distance rail. When you start diving into Labour's plans, I think it gets a bit farcical here. They're promising all these magical savings and they're going to get rid of bureaucracy. What they're actually doing is creating massive new bureaucracies. They're creating this Great British Railways, which will be responsible for managing the entire network, and it'll somehow be all-knowing and all-seeing, and it'll be perfect at its job. And if that wasn't enough, they're creating another new bureaucracy, a passenger representative, another quango to watch the first quango to make sure that the first quango doesn't screw up. So, I mean, I get really worried about these plans because Labour promises a lot. They say they're going to sort out things like the union strikes. They're going to make sure that the system is delivering passengers, that the fares don't go up. There's a lot of big promises there, but it's not clear how they're going to deliver it. And it seems obvious to me that you're going to end up having more problems and more disruption on the railways if they are centralised. You're giving more power to the unions. You'll be able to strike across the entire network anytime they like to get more demands out of it. You're not answering questions about where all this investment's going to come from, especially since we know there's limited resources fiscally from the government. So high promises, and I think people hope a lot out of these plans, but it's not clear. You know, we heard earlier, well, it couldn't be worse. I think it definitely can be worse, and that could be the result of these plans.
Completely take your point on bigger, full national strikes. Certainly, that's a risk here. But are we at risk of over-egging what's actually happening? This isn't going back to the bad old days of complete British rail nationalisation. This is franchises being taken one by one. A great number of franchises are already run by the government. Now, people can make their own views as to whether South Eastern, works particularly well or not, run by the government as things stand. But the question is this actually that big a pledge? Will things actually change all that much? We were looking at some pictures there of that blue train going out of King's Cross Station called Lumo. That's what's known as an open access carrier. That one actually won't be nationalised under Labour's plans. They're going to leave that one still private. So are they actually going to change all that much?
Well, I mean, the first major change, which everyone's very excited about, in fact, the Conservatives are going to do as well, which is to rebrand everything. So you're not going to have Southeastern or Northern, you're just going to have one brand for the railways. What that means in practice, I think you're right, is not particularly much. They're going to be painting some new livery onto the existing trains. You're right, there are some elements that will remain private. This has actually annoyed some on the left of the Labour Party. The rolling stock, the trains themselves, will still be privately owned because the government doesn't want to have to put forward the upfront cash to invest into it. And thankfully, Labour also won't be getting rid of the existing open access providers. Now, what worries me is open access is fantastic. You're right, Lumo has been a big success. It's not going to be nationalised. It'll continue operating. But that's really the model I think Labour should be adopting. It should be a pro-competition model rather than having a big national operator and then allowing a few open access additional operators here and there.
I guess the challenge to that is how much real competition can we have on the railways? We only have a certain amount of infrastructure that we can have. We can't necessarily have competing rail lines going to the same place. Is there a limit on the amount of competition?
Look, it's clearly not limitless, and there are different ways to set up your railway systems, in order to encourage competition. I think we could certainly have more competition and more operators than we currently do. I mean, we've seen the franchise system was basically, for the most part, giving a monopoly to one operator on a line and then them using already notably nationalised infrastructure that didn't operate that well. Nobody thinks that was a particularly fantastic model for the railways. It seems clear to me that a much better model would be to have more competition, have more competitors, even if on the same lines. You can operate trains at different times and allow competing and bidding to operate trains across the network.
That sounds a bit
now, that's
complicated.
Not going to work everywhere, but it certainly could. Well, it's complicated, but it's no more complicated than the state taking it all over and thinking that it knows best about how to operate the system and that it can do so efficiently.
Yes,
and that
it's the model of open access.
Isn't the experience.
The Lumo trains, those new blue ones, they run on the same lines. The Eastern Main Line, they run on the same lines as LNER, but just at different times, and then they compete with each. I suppose you could treat it like you do airport runways.
Yeah.
It's not just one plane that gets to fly on the runway. Lots of different companies can fly on the same runway.
I think it's exactly right. We should think about airlines as a big success in competition. We have different airlines providing a different quality of service at all sorts of different price ranges. You could have a similar situation on the railways as well. And we see with Lumo that at times that they're running trains, the prices tend to be lower on LNER as well. So it also results in lower passenger costs at the same time. So it's win-win. Now, I think you're right, Emily. It's not going to operate perfectly everywhere all the time, but it should certainly be, I suppose, the ideal we work towards. Creating a national operator, I think, does the opposite, though, because the government won't want too many open access operators competing with its own services.
Yeah.
And therefore, I think there'll be a big incentive not to have more open access, even if in theory you can have some open access.
Very interesting indeed. Thank you for joining us, Matthew Lesh from the Institute of Economic Affairs. Good to get your take on all this.